Welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine. That's me. Still sounding a little raspy here, but I'm feeling fine. It's just sort of the aftermath of this cold at this point. So this episode is GB Tracker stuff. I'm just kind of going in chronological order of just kind of what happened over the last, couple years-ish. And this is one of the things that happened along the way. I was in the midst of trying to finalize the design and development of that product for Undertone Audio, and this was the last stage of that process. I explain a little bit in the video, but we had tried a bunch of different transformers, and I was trying to get all of these things right, make sure unity gain was right, and get the sound right. And so this is the moment where I had gotten the unity gain right, and I was about to do the actual tests, and it turned out that the test worked out as well, at least to my satisfaction. And after you see this clip, which is sort of the in the moment part of it, then I'm going to pull up this Pro Tools session where I was recording these different versions, either going directly into the amp or going through the GB Tracker to the amp. And that's really what I was chasing with this thing is I don't want the sound to change when I go through this additional stuff. My process has always been I grab a guitar that I think is going to be the right guitar, I check some amps. Once I've chosen the combination that I want to use, then I go through this rig, and I don't want it to change at that point. And so I put a lot of effort into this. I think there's a lot of reasons that this would be helpful to have. None of the other combinations of this that I've used were really invisible sounding for me, and so I really want to try and get it right. So here you go. Check out the clip talking about where I was at this moment. The date was July 21st, 2021. Here it is. All right, I'm still messing around with this this tracker thing. I don't know if I'm going to show the previous video, but it was the first time I plugged it in after this, a second custom transformer has been built to try and get the overall gain structure right, try and get closer to unity gain. And I put it up. It's great. It's within 1/10 of a dB. I'm trying to actually get it better than that. And so, I discussed it with Larry, the designer that I work with at Undertone. And so there's two things that are going on here. One's the overall unity gain thing. And so I made an adjustment here. I tacked on a resistor. It's actually underneath this little subboard there. It's a series resistor that can adjust the overall gain across all of these gain settings on the input gain. Really, the output gain is really, that's permanently fixed in relation to the custom transformer. This is the second version of the custom transformer right there. And the other issue was the sound of it. I did some listening tests, and under a particular circumstance, I could pick out the difference between going directly into the amp and going through the tracker box 100% of the time. And so I'm trying to see if I can get that to go away and have them sound identical. And what we think is happening is that when we started out with this, we started with a very high input impedance on the active DI. So it's set at 4.7 megohms. And 4.7 megohms is good because in theory it would be more invisible sounding. But what ends up happening is that the interaction between a passive guitar and this input impedance gets captured in the active circuitry, and then that gets sent on to an amp, which most amps will have a lower input impedance. And I've asked a bunch of opinions about this. I was just actually met a amp repair guy today, good guy to ask, because it was the only place I could find resistors in all of Vermont that I could actually go somewhere and get. And in his opinion, like, what is the most common input
impedance on guitar amps, and everybody seems to agree that 1 megohm is most common. And so I'm going to change the input impedance on this thing to 1 megohm, and so the guitar will interact with the input of the DI the same way it would interact with the input of a guitar amp. So that interaction gets captured in the active circuitry, gets passed on through this transformer, and then can go on to the amp. Everything else in the circuit really should be quite invisible. But that it's really these passive interactions that are most of what colors the sound on this stuff. Like the amplifier in this thing is, it's a Class A amp, and it's completely invisible sounding. There's no way it's going to be a factor in this. The transformer is potentially going to have a little more color to it, but they've gotten transformer design really good at this point, and I think they're generally pretty invisible. So I'm hoping this right here, that little resistor I put on parallel, dropped it down to just under 1 megohm. We'll see what happens, see if that solves it. But you can see now what happened with the gain. So I'm plugged directly from, this is my emulated guitar source. We're going to pretend that's a guitar. So I got a cable coming out of there, and it's going directly into this little Apollo Twin. And I just sort of adjusted the gain to get to a place that's easily identifiable. It's at -16. And now what we'll do is we're going to go through the tracker. Dun, 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 and go back in here. Sorry, I'm trying to hold the camera and do all this stuff at the same time. Okay. Bam. Okay, here we go. Now we're going through the tracker. And so now we're about 1/10 of a dB up, but it's probably less than that because of the rounding errors. It's probably somewhere more than 1/100ths. Any 5 or above, and you're going to get a 0.1. So it's somewhere in there. And so this, I experimented with a few things, and I think this ends up being the best, because what happens with this device is that you have all of these matched gain settings. And so let's say you're playing a quiet part and you want to have that gain captured louder in the computer, but you still want to hit the amp with the same amount of gain and have it be totally unity. Well, what you do is you turn this up, click 1 step, turn that down 1 step, and it will still be unity. And so in this second position, it actually ends up identical with the rounding error. So now we're back at -16. And so then the next gain setting, boop, boop, we go here. There it is, up 0.1 or something less than that. And then here we go again. That next setting, up 0.1, or probably something less. And then here's the next setting. And then we're back to -16. So this was the best I could find. I mean, we're dealing with sort of the limitations of the resistor tolerances at this point. And so, roughly half of the settings end up being identical. The other half are up somewhere, maybe a little less. I think it's safe to assume it's less than 0.1 dB because the other settings are actually rounding to be exactly the same. So I think this is as close as I can get it. And there may be, people out there that can still hear that difference. I don't know if I can. We're about to find out. All right, here comes the test.
All right, so, you can hear me sort of talking about all the stuff I was going through. So, and then after I recorded that, I did, more listening tests. I'd done quite a few, leading up to that. And I was still, able to quite readily pick out the difference between the two, and that was definitely not working. And this is a tricky thing to pin down. And you'll see, because I'm going to share this session with my repeated attempts at trying to find something that would actually be revealing with this, because I don't get the luxury of being able to have a single performance that is being, routed through a couple of different contexts that I'm comparing, because one of these is the guitar plugged directly into the amp, and one of them is with the guitar plugged through the GB tracker. There's no way for me to capture a single performance, like DI performance, in the computer and then hear it each way. It's too late, it's gone through a DI of some sort. and it was really all about capturing directly in the amp. So that means that the performances cannot be identical. I have to play this thing twice, as similar as I possibly can, so the differences in my performance aren't so distracting that I can't hear this extremely minute difference in this one input impedance on the DI part of the GB tracker. It was really tricky, and I tried a bunch of stuff, just experimenting with different amps and guitars initially, just to get something that would be revealing of the issue that I've always had with this. And I'll describe the issue a little bit. So I've been using this technique for a long time. Initially, I was using an Avalon U5 DI. That was the one that seemed to, yield the best results for me. And there were times where it was actually kind of cool. You'd go through this, this chain of the U5 into a reamp, and I had these sort of custom-made reamps that were built out of a, vintage Neve transformer. In theory, should be really great for this. And it was an idea that Larry had. He said, "Hey, these would be great for a reamp." So he built them. They sounded great. I used them for a long time. And with that rig, I always know I just had this thing, and I was doing this all the way back in early 2000s. So this was around for, I think it definitely started in Barefoot. It wasn't Hunk of Shit era, because I hadn't met Larry yet. And actually, this was definitely all post Barefoot. But early on, 2001, 2002, definitely doing it on the Good Charlotte record. I really distinctly remember doing this on that record. And having this sensation that when it went through the DI reamp signal path, when it went through that path, that it got somehow a little bit clearer sounding. And I didn't, it's like, I guess it's a little different. That's weird, that I put more stuff on there and it sounds a little bit clearer. You'd think that plugging straight into the amp would be a little bit clearer. And there were times when the amp, for some reason, just felt, I don't know, just a little more solid or something, going direct in. But I just, kind of accepted, it's a different thing. I'll just adjust for it. Great, here we go. Didn't worry about it too much. But it sort of persisted. And then much, much later on, maybe 10 years later, we had developed the Undertone console, and then the Undertone, channel strip preamp that had a DI input built into it. And so I started using that DI as the capture part and pairing it up with those same Neve transformer reamps. And it was a similar thing, it's just a little bit clearer for some reason. Going through this extra stuff. I don't understand why, but whatever, there it is. And it was just kind of part of it. And sometimes it was pleasant, and sometimes it was, didn't seem totally appropriate. And so ultimately, when I really chased this whole thing, and we got the reamp side of it as close as we possibly could with the source impedance, because we had initially had the source impedance on the reamp side very, very low. That's generally tends to be a better way to go, because it's less susceptible to being affected by whatever load you're putting on it. But in this case, the source impedance of a passive guitar is not particularly low. And so that wasn't interacting necessarily the same way. And so that was part of redoing the custom transformer. We raised that source impedance. I don't know if I'm remembering this number exactly. It's right around 2K-ish, something like that. That was Larry's best, sort of amalgamation. I mean, there's a lot of things that affect the source impedance on a guitar. It's like when you adjust the volume, it has an effect. There's a lot of things that do it, but when the volume's all the way up, we sort of averaged it out and felt like, okay, around this range, would be good. I can't remember if it's exactly 2K. I think it's somewhere around there. It's probably in the manual. I don't know, look it up. So, so then, so then this thing was still there. This, like, it's clearer when I go through the GB tracker. And the GB tracker is now this all-in-one unit where the DI and the reamp is all built into a single box, the whole thing. And I'm still having this sensation. And so the last remaining thing was that that all the way back to the very beginning, that Avalon U5 DI had a very high source impedance. I think theirs was a little over 5 megohms. And so when I told Larry, this is the DI that I've been using and I really like it for all the stuff that I've been recording, he looked up the specifications for it and he, followed suit and had a very high input impedance and actually agreed. He thought that that was a good way to go, to have that source impedance higher than I'm saying source impedance, sorry, my brain is still a little foggy. That input impedance higher than any of the other input impedances that you might be going into, basically any of the other amps you might be going into. So you don't overly degrade the sound before you going into the amp. And so he felt like that's probably a better way to go. But it turned out that, as I described in the video, that it was capturing that interaction between the guitar and that very high input impedance, and then sending that on to the amp, and it was just a slightly different sound. And so here it is, me going through this process of trying to chase this down, deal with me trying to play guitar super consistently. I am not a great guitar player. That'll be very obvious pretty quick here. And it's pretty funny. So I'm going to wear headphones for this, but okay, take one earphone off for this part of it so I'm not yelling. Okay, so I started with this thing, which was, listening back to it, it's like, what the fuck was I thinking? I think probably, suitably easy part for me to play, so I could play it consistently, but kind of a muddy, shitty guitar sound. And the place where this effect was the most noticeable for me was on guitar sounds that were kind of just a little bit distorted. Once you totally just blow it out, it all gets kind of mushed together, and these kind of details would get lost a little bit. This, I think this was maybe a magnetone or something. It sounds a little bit like that, which is kind of a dark, right? Whatever. It's cool sound. Was not revealing at all for this. There was, I did it through the GB tracker, did it through a direct thing. It's like, I don't know what's going on with this. Can't hear any difference at all. This is not helping me. Okay, so then, so then there's me stumbling through Hey Joe and trying to do sort of a semi-distorted guitar sound through, I think, that same amp setup. Again, not hugely revealing. Okay, and then I guess this is just a unused playlist there. Okay, so then here is, okay, and then I think this is when I was at Barefoot. This little window when I was doing all those transfers and stuff, I tried to do some of this other, experimentation while I was there. Oh, sorry, one at a time. Okay, so more me stumbling through Hey Joe. Okay, and so on this one, and I'll turn both of these on and we'll solo back and forth between them. I started to feel like, okay, I think I might be hearing this thing that I've experienced a lot just over the years using it. But again, like this part, I am just not a good enough guitar player to play this part exactly the same enough where that doesn't become by far the overwhelming difference at any given moment, And so, yeah, so again, didn't really help me a whole lot. And I was like, okay, didn't do that. Yeah, no more playlists there. Okay, so then This, I believe, is back now in this room. I'm doing it more. And you can see the note that I have here, playlist .05. We're going to work our way up to that. That's the one where I put the 1 mega ohm input impedance on, and ultimately got to a place. And when I did that and started ABing, I knew immediately, okay, this has been solved. But here you can hear the journey there. Okay, so still still with the Hey Joe. Oh my goodness. Yeah, kind of a lo-fi sounding amp there. So then I okay, yeah, see. Okay, yeah. So then I thought, well, I should try some other instruments too, and so I played a little bit with a Fender Bass 6, just see if that would, you know, have this thing come screaming out at me. Nope, that didn't do it. So onward, and so then, okay, so I came up with another thing to try and play. Maybe I could play more consistently. Even that Bass 6 thing was not enormously easy for me to play consistently. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. Let's keep it real dumb. Keep this part as dumb as it gets, right? Okay, and so then the mic was kind of further away from the amp. So then I put the mic right up on the amp, and you can hear it now. And so on this one, I could pick it out every time, 100%. This was the one that did it. So here, I'll set this up now. And so I use this little guy here. If you're into doing blind listening tests, this thing makes it super easy. It's really awesome for this. And so I'm going to play it first without it being hidden, so you all can kind of tune into the difference. And actually, I'm going to take these files, probably this one, the playlist after it, and then of course the .05 playlist. I'll upload these files to a Dropbox folder and make them available. If you guys want to fuck around listening to this, you can download them and A/B and see how it strikes you guys. So here we go. I'm gonna put on both my earphones now. Sorry if I start yelling at you. Yeah, so it's right there for me. I'm pretty tuned into this. This may be obvious for all of you, but here we'll see if I can try to not embarrass myself and nail this a couple times for you. So it's this one. That's the tracker. There it is. Let's start over. Yeah, again, this is the GB tracker. This is the GB tracker. So I think it's pretty audible. It's, you know, you can hear it right away. Okay, so then I added the resistor to the GB tracker and decided to come up with another thing. The other thing that's kind of tricky about this is that there is the risk, you know, I try to play a long enough section. If you play too short of a section, I think even if you're not trying to, subliminally, you could start to memorize some details, subtle details in the actual performance, and be able to recognize one versus the other. So that's a risk when you're doing this, and so it's probably really only mostly meaningful like the first maybe one or two times that you actually do the listening test, and beyond that, the more you're listening to each one, knowing what they are, you could start to, tune into some specific performance moments in there that would tip you off. This blind listening stuff is very tricky. Okay, so here we go. I ended up changing the part for some reason. I don't know why. It's a similar kind of thing. And this one ended up being a little bit harder to tell for me, but still. And actually, I got ahead of myself. Playlist .04 has not been changed yet. And I tried another part, and it was still identifiable for me. Now that I've gone back and listened to both of these again, Playlist .03 was the most revealing, I think, that particular, I don't know, part or whatever. So, okay, so here it is, still the really high input impedance. I think it's 4.7 megohms, and different part, but again, appropriately easy for me to play. So here we go. Okay, so that's the difference in the sound, knowing what they are. And on this one, it's so ringy, it ends up, the one going through the GB tracker feels just slightly less compressed to me. So that's what I tune into. And also on the low notes, there's that initial sound when the pick first drops down on the string, and there's this tiny little tick at the beginning before it actually gets drawn across and plucks the string. Is kind of a high frequency little tick in there. And in the GB tracker version, it feels a little bit disembodied, whereas when you plugged directly into the amp, it was all sort of more a congealed sound, that was all one sound. So that was the other thing that sort of tipped me off there. Let's see if I can do this one. This one is definitely tougher. Okay. Okay, I think this is the GB tracker. Yeah, GB tracker. Yeah. All right, well, there it is. I mean, in reality, if I was really doing this, and when I did it before, it's like, I'd have to get this like 5 times in a row. There's, just the way random chance works, there's certainly plenty of times where I could just randomly get it right a couple in a row. Okay, so now, here, let's go to the one, the last playlist here, this one. And so this is the one where now it has the 1 meg ohm input. And so here we go. We can listen, knowing what is what here, and see how these things have sort of synced up. Yeah, I mean, I can just tell that I don't think I could pull those apart. I'm just not detecting anything that I can really grab onto there. I'd certainly be curious to know if anybody could. I did actually do some blind tests with this. I mean, you know, I already know how that went. I was not able to pick it out. And you know, if any of you go for it and really want to try and see if you can nail these, like generally the meaningful way to do this would be, you know, you listen to it first, knowing which is which. Try and get a clear sense of what differences you might be hearing. Then do an actual listening test where it's blind. If you use this plugin, you can do that. And do it at least 5 times. Like, you got to get it right 5 times in a row for it to actually be meaningful. You know, doing it 5 times and getting it 3 times and not 2 times doesn't mean anything. Even, you know, getting it 4 times and not getting it 1 time can mean it's not meaningful. My experience with the blind listening thing is like, when there's really a difference that's perceivable, you hear it every time and you can identify it every time. And so that might be fun to play with if y'all want to check that out. But that was the process, you know, that I went through, you know, and got to a place that I really, you know, felt good about using for myself and serving to the world as here's a great thing, great tool to use. You know, I think, you know, the feedback has been generally really, really positive. You know, I think different people use this approach in different ways. And for the people out there that were having the same frustrations that I were, like matching the gain and really being able to, you know, reliably have this sound just like it does when, you know, there's people out there that are still really into this thing of like, I have to plug my vintage Fender Tele into my vintage, you know, Fender Champ, Tweed Champ, you know, and that's the only thing that will ever sound good. And if you want to use, you know, this more modern workflow, you know, I really feel like the GB Tracker is the only thing that'll really get you there for those people that are, you know, trying to be that anal about it. And ultimately, we put a jumper inside the GB Tracker. I felt it was a little too tweaky to put on the front of the thing, or sort of a little short on panel space there. It's a small thing, but you can do that. You know, if you want to have that sensation of, you know, just a little bit added clarity to how the guitar hits the amp, and having it feel a tiny bit less compressed. You can, you know, switch that thing back to the 4.7 ohm meg ohm version, and do it. So there you go. That's the world of me losing my mind trying to, you know, make things as perfect as I can and play Hey Joe over and over again. So I hope that was entertaining. All right, cool. Thanks for watching. Bye.